Hey there, this is Seth Schaefer from Team Just Cause Robotics. Long time no see. As many of you are probably aware, I had the amazing opportunity to attend Battlebots Season 5 filming on October 2nd through 15th and was extremely busy in the weeks leading up to the event and during. Now, having had some time to catch up on much needed rest and recuperate, I'm excited to share with you all what that experience was like, competing with the world's largest, most destructive, and most impressively engineered class of robots. Battlebots is pretty much accepted as the highest level of competition in robotic combat, as every team needs to prove to a selection committee that they have what it takes in order to compete. That's not to say that every single team or robot who wanted to compete and was accepted was there this year. COVID, of course, brought a huge number of changes to the way that the event was run from previous years, and due to US and foreign travel restrictions, many international teams weren't able to make it. That said, I can tell you firsthand the level of competition was still extremely high, and this season of the show will certainly have some of the most incredible, hardest hitting, most destructive, and best fights this show has ever seen. Still, I need to set some ground rules. There are many things that I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement or NDA specifying I will not discuss until after the relevant episodes are announced and air on TV. I don't want any of you asking me in the comments about spoilers and things I can't say, or worse, posting spoilers there that could ruin the show for everyone else. I want to specify ahead of time what I cannot say. This includes whether Bloodsport or any other bot won or lost even a single fight, whether Bloodsport or any other bot was matched up against any other particular robot, who was in the top 32 or any tournament rounds, whether or not any bot will fight any particular episode of the show. I cannot discuss any damage that Bloodsport or any other robot received or dealt during a fight. Images of battle damage can imply what type of robot was fought or even who won a fight, so that won't be shown until after the fight airs on TV. I also cannot get into specifics about repairs we needed to make after a fight or before a fight until that fight airs on TV for the same reason. I apologize in advance for the fact that due to these restrictions, this video will probably be a lot of me talking and not so much footage of things happening. I did my best to document what I could, but I just had my phone on me to take photos and film intermittently, so don't expect a high-budget documentary from me. I know that sounds like a lot is off the table, but hold on because I have an important announcement. I have a bunch of videos planned out, which I'll be creating and releasing while the show airs on TV. I hope to make a video before the show airs where you can hear from each member of the Bots and Stuff team about their own experience at BattleBots, what their background is, and how they got involved in robot combat, plus how they contribute to the team. Once the show begins to air, every time we have a fight air on TV, I will be posting a follow-up video within a week if possible where I discuss exactly what preparation we did for the fight, our strategy and pre-fight plan, how we made the decision about what configuration and weapon to go with, and more. Please subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified about any future videos. I want to give you guys an in-depth behind-the-scenes look at everything that happened before, during, and after each fight in detail you just won't see on TV. I have photos and videos after every match of the damage that both robots suffered and what repairs were needed. I'll also tell you guys about what preparations we made before the fights, which probably won't be shown on TV. If you came to this channel due to my tutorial videos, event reports, and build logs for my smaller robots, don't worry, my regular content won't be going anywhere. Stick around to the end of the video to hear my plans for what I'll be making videos about between now and when the show airs, and in weeks when Bloodsport isn't fighting on TV. So without further ado, how was it actually competing at the event? Let's start with arrival. Everyone already needed to have passed a PCR test before flying out to the competition. Everyone was given a rapid and a one-day test upon arrival and not allowed inside the hangar or the pit area until passing the rapid test. If anyone had to partially or fully cover the costs of the test on their own, BattleBots reimbursed their costs. Everyone had to wear masks everywhere except when eating and in some cases on camera. We were allowed to keep them on for fights if we wished, and we were not required to take masks off on camera, but we were told when it was safe to do so if we chose to. Our team did remove our masks for fights and interviews and hero shots/team shots, but we saw a few teams who chose not to, and it seemed like production wasn't complaining about it or giving anyone a hard time. They weren't very pleasant to wear in the pits as it got very hot and humid, but we made do and got a fan to keep ourselves cool. COVID safety was taken extremely seriously throughout the event. All production staff were very careful with the COVID safety guidelines. We had catered lunches and dinners every single day, even days when there weren't fights being filmed. We were provided per team boxes of snacks and water bottles. My team and many other teams stayed in an Airbnb that was completely separate from where the other teams were staying, using a stipend that we were provided instead of using the shared hotel that BattleBots offered to provide. We did have to do our own shopping for groceries and Home Depot or Lowe's runs, but we were very careful out in public, always wore masks, and sanitized our hands after leaving any stores. McMaster had 3-hour shipping during event days, and those were brought to our pits and disinfected by the staff. Lending of tools was handled by the teams. We were careful to disinfect anything we lent or used, and our hands after using borrowed tools. We didn't socialize very much with other teams inside, and when we did, we wouldn't enter their pit area unless allowed to, and followed social distancing practices as well. Speaking of which, let's talk about our pit neighbors and how it was socializing with other teams. We were surrounded by a number of teams. To our right was Huge, to our left was Axe Backwards, behind us were Sharkoprian, Sub-Zero, and a new team to Battlebots, Grabot. The teams seemed to be clustered partly in alphabetic order, but there were a bunch of random groupings as well. The pits were sort of divided in half two ways. We had the east and west side divided up for COVID safety reasons, and then there was a huge aisle in the middle of this gigantic hangar where the pits were, so there were teams on one side and the other side of the aisle as well. The battery tents were set up as socially distanced separate charging tables, and it was allowed to socialize between teams, but every pit area had a tape line around it which we were asked not to cross into other teams' pits. We were also obviously wearing masks and keeping 6 feet apart at all times. I did get to have nice conversations outside with a few teams while we were in the paint areas of the battery tent, but of course masks were worn even in these outdoor areas. So, how did we prepare for fights? The pits were open from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. for the first few days before fights began on October 5th, and then from 6 a.m. to midnight thereafter. We were frequently there 12 to 16 hours a day. It was actually a ton more work than I'd expected. I'll get to why in a bit. Whenever we were told who we would be fighting, we pretty much watched all of that robot's fights from the most recent versions of their bot if they had competed before. We analyzed their driving style, strengths, and weaknesses. Whether they competed before or not, we tried to have at least one person keeping an eye out whenever their bot was in the test box, so we could see what they were up to, how they were doing, and get an idea of if they'd made major changes to the robot. Several times we found out who we would face the morning of the fight, so we were always scrambling to get our configuration ready all morning when that happened. We often looked for what mistakes they had made in previous fights, or what they seemed to be doing consistently in fights that would lead to a loss, and based on how fast and maneuverable their bot was compared to ours, we would talk about whether we could expect to get to the back and sides of their robot or if we had to face them head on. We also would look at how their armor, and especially any front wedge or forks, were attached. We looked for edges our blade might catch, or features like floor scraping wedgelets, forks, hinged wedges, or fixed wedges to determine who would likely get under whom from the front. We also paid attention to how high up their weapon or armor were, and what our weapon would be able to reach on their bot. What material was the armor? Would it likely break or fail? Might it break us or our weapon, etc.? What sorts of wheels did they have, and how vulnerable were those to our weapon? Are there exposed belts and chains driving important bits? Etc. Basically looking for failure points on all of the moving parts of the opponent. We would then have a team discussion, and generally we'd arrive at unanimous decision as to what weapon and front configuration to use. So what happens between matches? Tons and tons of stuff to do. Everything takes a lot longer than you might expect. Heavies are a massive shift in scale. Very little can be done by only one person. Just for a sake of comparison to like Division, my 3-pound beetle weight, instead of having just one battery, in Bloodsport we have 4 5S and 2 6S LiPo batteries, and 2 2S receiver batteries. So it takes about an hour or two to recharge all of them. No batteries were allowed inside the robot in the pits. To test, we had to wheel the robot and weapon on separate carts outside, plug in all 6 batteries, install the top panels, install at least a dozen bolts into the top panels, add the lower bearing, the weapon, the upper bearing, and then a nut. We performed our ritual nut tightening dance routine for several minutes to tighten the nut and preload the bearings. If we were testing self-righting, we needed to add the righting pole and 2 shoulder bolts and washers and tighten those. Then we would cart the bot into the test box if nobody was in line, otherwise we had to wait for whoever was in front of us. We declared what sort of test we were performing to the staff at the safety box. We then would have 3 or 4 people there, so all but one person would lift the robot off the cart and the last person would pull the cart out from under it, and we'd slowly lower it to the ground. Then everyone except for Justin would leave the test box. One of the test box doors was closed and the bottom safety latch was locked on both sides. Justin would then turn on the receiver battery switches and the 4 Waiachi switches, 2 for drive and 2 for weapon. After which, he would leave and the box would be closed and locked up by a staff member, and then we were allowed to test. When we were done testing, if we needed to fix anything internal, we would reverse every step listed, taking off the top panels, pulling the batteries out after removing the weapon, and then wheeling the robot back into the pits. So testing the robot was pretty much a minimum of a half-hour process every single time we entered the test box. After every single fight, we had to pull the tops off and unplug all of the batteries right outside of the arena, and then wheel the bot out to the battery tent, test the electronics to see what, if anything, broke, then pull all the batteries out, start charging, and wheel the bot back to the pits. So, what's next for Team Just Cuz Robotics? For the probably 12 of you still watching, I'm sure you'd like to know what other non-Battlebots content I have planned. I still think that the 1 pound ant weight class and 3 pound beetle weight class are the best places for new builders to start, and I have the goal of getting as many people into the sport as possible. To that end, I've designed and started building my very own arena for ant weights and plastic ants to compete in when COVID is no longer a huge concern. Big thanks to SendCutSend for sponsoring that build, as well as providing last-minute parts for Battlebots free of charge. I'm also making sure all of my bots are ready for the next Norwalk Havoc event in late November, which I hope to attend. I'll be sure to share more about that whole process and an event report video after competing there, as usual. If you have any other questions for me about competing, let me know in the comments down below. Just keep in mind what's covered by the NDA. If there are a ton of questions, I'll make a separate Q&A video to address them all. That's all I have for you today. If you liked this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get notified about my future videos. Thanks for watching!